The crash of crystal against Italian marble was the only sound in my suddenly silent kitchen. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings, a sharp, violent sound that cut through the pleasant murmur of the string quartet in the garden. The champagne flute, a delicate piece of Waterford I'd owned for 30 years, slipped from my daughter-in-law's hand the exact moment her mother hit the floor. Her name was Carol, and she was convulsing on my pristine white floor, a small line of foam gathering at the corners of her mouth like poison ivy clinging to an old stone wall. My son, Kevin, who had been holding court by the fireplace, rushed to her side, his face a perfect, practiced mask of shock and concern. My daughter-in-law, Brittany, let out a scream that sounded more rehearsed than horrified, a sound designed for an audience. And all I could think, standing there in my own home, surrounded by 30 of my closest friends and colleagues at my own retirement party, was a single cold thought. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. You see, that poisoned glass of champagne, the one now in 1,000 glittering shards on the floor, was meant for me. After selling my real estate empire for a cool $25 million, I thought I was ready to retire. I thought I was ready for a life of peace, tending to my bougainvillea here in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, with the Camelback Mountain watching over me. But as I watched my daughter-in-law empty a tiny vial into my personal champagne glass just an hour earlier, the one with the tiny, almost invisible chip on the rim that I always used, I realized my fight was far from over. I just quietly, calmly, switched my glass with her mother's when no one was looking. And now, here we were, living in the explosive consequences of that simple action. Before I unpack all of that, and believe me, there's a lot to unpack. If you're watching this, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world to me that you're here. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Please let me know in the comments. Okay, so as the chaos erupted and someone frantically called 911, my son Kevin looked up from Carol's twitching body. His eyes, those sincere brown eyes I had trusted my entire life, the same eyes that looked at me with adoration when he was a boy, met mine for just a fraction of a second. But a fraction was all it took. In that fleeting glance, I didn't see the panic of a son witnessing a medical emergency. I saw the cold, hard calculation of a businessman watching a multi-million-dollar deal go sideways. He knew. He knew what was in that glass, and he knew who it was intended for. And as my son Kevin rushed over, the look in his eyes told me he knew more than he was letting on. Much, much more. To understand the chilling coldness in my son's eyes, we have to go back 2 hours, to when the evening was still full of promise. My sprawling Scottsdale home, with its saltillo tile floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, was filled with the sounds of laughter and the clinking of glasses. The air smelled of desert rain and expensive perfume. I had built my real estate business from the ground up after my husband, David, passed away 15 years ago. I turned a small 2-person agency into an empire that shaped a good portion of this city's skyline. Selling it for $25 million wasn't just a financial victory. It was the culmination of my life's work, a testament to every sleepless night and every risk I'd taken. "Mom, you deserve this," Kevin had said, his voice thick with emotion as he insisted he and Brittany handle the entire party. "You just relax. Let us take care of everything." And I, a mother who wanted to believe the best of her only child, had let him. I had believed him. Brittany was a vision of domestic perfection that evening, gliding through the party in a silk dress that probably cost more than my first home. Usually, the woman acted as if loading the dishwasher was a Herculean task, but tonight she was Martha Stewart incarnate. She flitted around, adjusting floral arrangements of desert roses and polishing already gleaming crystal, her smile never faltering. "Nothing is too good for you, Eleanor," she gushed, squeezing my arm with perfectly manicured nails. "But I've spent 70 years on this earth, and I didn't survive decades in the cutthroat world of high-stakes real estate by being naive. I noticed things. The way her smile was a perfect, practiced curve that never quite reached her eyes. The way she and Kevin would exchange quick, silent glances across the crowded room when they thought I wasn't looking. I was chatting with my old business partner, a man I'd known for 40 years, near the French doors that opened to the patio. The party was in full swing. The string quartet was playing a soft melody, and everyone was distracted. Everyone but me. My gaze kept drifting back to Brittany, who was lingering by the champagne table. I watched her glance around, a quick, furtive movement of a shoplifter, Before her hand dipped into her impossibly expensive Hermes purse, my blood turned to ice. She pulled out a small dark glass vial. With a swift, practiced motion that spoke of rehearsal, she uncapped it and, shielding the action with her body, emptied the clear liquid into one specific glass. Not just any glass. My glass. The one with the tiny, familiar chip on the rim that I always used. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I just smiled because I suddenly, terrifyingly, realized the best way to deal with a snake is to let it think it's about to strike. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage, but on the outside, I was the picture of a serene, retired matriarch. I had to be. Showing any sign of distress would ruin my only chance to turn the tables. I politely excused myself from my conversation, my eyes never leaving Brittany. I watched as she picked up the poison chalice, her movements fluid and deliberate, her face a mask of loving, daughterly concern. She navigated the crowd with a predatory grace, her eyes locked on me, her target. "Eleanor, you look a little tired," she cooed as she reached me, her voice a perfect blend of sympathy and sweetness. "Here, have some champagne. You've more than earned it." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. My life's work had earned me a death sentence from the two people who stood to inherit it. I took the glass, my fingers purposely brushing against hers. "Thank you, dear. That's so thoughtful of you." I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, letting her see the grateful, slightly weary smile I had perfected over decades of business negotiations. She bought it completely. Her own smile widened, a flash of triumph and cruel satisfaction in her eyes before she veiled it again. She thought she had won. She turned away to mingle, to establish her alibi, leaving me holding my own execution in a crystal glass. I waited. For 10 long minutes, which felt like 10 years. I mingled. I held the glass, laughing at a joke from a neighbor, nodding along to a story from a former colleague, all while the liquid poison swirled just inches from my lips. My mind raced, searching for an opportunity, a single moment of distraction. Then I saw it. Brittany was completely engrossed in showing off her new Cartier tennis bracelet to the neighbors, her back turned to the drink table. Her mother, Carol, was standing nearby, looking a bit lost as usual, her own glass empty. Carol was a bit scattered, a bit vague. A moth drawn to the brightest light in the room, which was usually her daughter. This was my chance. I walked over, placing my glass down on the table right next to Carol's purse as I pretended to search for something in my own. "Carol, you look like you could use a refill," I said warmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Before she could answer, I picked up her empty glass and handed her my full one. "Here, take this one. I haven't even touched it." She grabbed it without a second thought. "Oh, thank you, Eleanor, you're so sweet," she said, taking a large, grateful gulp. 5 minutes later, she was telling me the champagne had a fascinating, almost almond-like flavor. The rest, as they say, happened very, very quickly. Her eyes glazed over, her words slurred, and then she collapsed. As the paramedics wheeled Carol out, Kevin insisted I stay home. "We'll handle it, Mom. You need to rest." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. And I knew exactly why. "Nonsense," I said, my voice as sharp and clear as the crystal that now lay shattered on my floor. I cut through Kevin's attempt to control the situation before he could even finish his sentence. "Carol is practically family. I'm coming with you." I grabbed my purse and keys from the entryway table, not giving him or a very pale, panicked-looking Brittany a chance to argue. I wasn't going to be shuffled off to the side. I needed to be there. Not just out of some feigned concern for Carol, but to watch them, to study them, to see how they would react when their perfectly crafted plan blew up in their faces. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and strained silence. I sat in the back of Kevin's pristine BMW, the scent of expensive leather doing little to cover the stench of their betrayal. At the hospital, the emergency room was a chaotic symphony of beeps, hurried footsteps, and hushed, serious conversations. I made sure to position myself where I could see and hear everything. I stayed close enough to the nurse's station to overhear the hushed fragments of conversation. "Acute poisoning, cause unknown," one nurse said to the other, her brow furrowed. The doctor, a young, serious-looking man, mentioned something about plant alkaloids to the lead paramedic. It was a specific technical term. It told me that whoever did this had done their research on hard-to-trace toxins. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated execution. Brittany paced the waiting room, her $4,000 heels clicking a frantic, panicked rhythm on the polished linoleum floor. It was the only sound in our little corner of misery, a metronome counting down her anxiety. Kevin sat rigidly in a hard plastic chair, his phone buzzing nonstop with texts. He ignored every single one. "This is just awful," Brittany said for the 10th time, wringing her hands in a theatrical display of distress. "Poor Mom. I just can't imagine what could have happened." I walked over and put what I hoped was a comforting hand on her trembling shoulder. "These things can be a mystery, dear." Then I delivered my first little test, my first volley in this new war. Casually I added, "You know, it's lucky she didn't drink much of that champagne. She only had a few sips before she collapsed, really." Brittany's pacing faltered. It was almost imperceptible, but in the harsh fluorescent light of the waiting room, I saw it clearly. A tiny hitch in her step. A flicker of raw terror in her eyes. "Champagne?" she asked, her voice a little too high, a little too shrill. You think the champagne did this?" I waved a dismissive hand, playing the part of the slightly confused old woman. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Just an old woman's mind seeing patterns where there are none." But it was too late. I had my answer. She knew the poison was in that glass and she was terrified. Watching them whisper furiously in the hospital parking lot after the doctor announced Carol was stable and would be kept for observation, I knew their plan A had failed spectacularly. But what I didn't know yet was just how sinister their plan B really was. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 9 o'clock sharp. I knew who it would be before I even looked at the security camera. It was Kevin, holding a box of pastries from my favorite French bakery, and wearing an expression of deep, filial concern that he must have practiced in the mirror. "Thought you might want some company, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek as he brushed past me into the kitchen he grew up in. He moved around the space with a familiar ease, reaching for the sugar bowl without asking, opening the cupboard where the coffee mugs had been kept for 30 years. A wave of profound, heart-wrenching sadness washed over me. This was still my son, the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, clutching them in his chubby fist as if they were treasure. When had that boy turned into this man? This stranger who would stand by while his wife tried to murder his mother for her inheritance? We sat at the polished oak table in my breakfast nook, the morning sun streaming through the windows, making everything look deceptively cheerful. The air smelled of fresh coffee and betrayal. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice soft and gentle. "You know me, dear," I said, keeping my own tone light, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "It takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old bones." He gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's what I'm afraid of," he said. An odd thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. I knew a performance was coming. "The thing is, Mom," he continued, carefully pushing a piece of a flaky croissant around his plate with a fork, "Brittany and I have been talking. And we're worried about you." "Worried about my situation?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're 70 years old," he said, his gesture taking in the large, beautiful, and suddenly very empty house around us. "Living all alone. All that money from the sale. It's a lot for one person to manage. It's a huge responsibility." There it was. The opening move of their next play. "And after what happened last night," he pressed on, his voice filled with a fake, cloying sincerity. "What if that had been you? What if you had collapsed and no one was here to find you for hours?" He was using their own failed murder attempt as an argument for why I needed their protection. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it nearly made me laugh. And that's when I decided to stop playing defense and start planning my own attack. The moment Kevin's BMW pulled out of my driveway, the taste of betrayal bitter in my mouth, I picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. A simple accusation wouldn't be enough. They would deny it, and it would become a messy, he said affair. I needed proof. I needed a strategy. I called Robert Sterling. Robert had been my lawyer for 30 years. He was a thin, precise man who wore perfectly tailored suits from Savile Row, and had piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd guided me through my husband's death, the building of my empire, and every major decision since. If you suspect your own child is trying to kill you, Robert is exactly the man you want in your corner. I met him at his downtown Phoenix office, a sanctuary of dark wood, worn leather, and the quiet hum of power. I told him everything, my voice low and steady, recounting every detail without emotion. The vial, the chipped glass, the swap, the hospital, Kevin's visit that morning and his slimy pitch for Willow Creek Estates. He listened without a single interruption, his pen the only thing moving, scratching furiously across a yellow legal pad. "You're certain it was poison, Eleanor?" he asked when I had finally finished, his voice calm. "As certain as I am that I'm sitting in this chair, Robert." He leaned back, tapping the end of his expensive pen against his lips. "The problem, as always, is proving intent. They could claim it was a supplement, a flavoring, anything. And their move for guardianship, that's the more immediate and frankly more dangerous threat." He explained in chilling detail how they could use my age, my recent stress from the sale, and the accident at the party to petition a court. They could argue I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. They get you isolated in a place like Willow Creek, they get a judge to grant them control of your assets, and it's game over, he said grimly. "So what do we do?" I asked, my own voice a low growl. Robert smiled, a sharp, thin smile that reminded me of a fox closing in on its prey. "First, we get your competency on record. I'm booking you an evaluation with the top geriatric psychiatrist in the state tomorrow. Second, we make your estate plan into an ironclad fortress. And third, we get creative." The new will was signed, witnessed, and sealed by the next afternoon. Kevin's inheritance was slashed to a pittance. Brittany's name was wiped clean from every page. They wanted a war over my money. They had no idea I had just brought out the heavy artillery. The security company Robert recommended was as discreet as they were efficient. An unmarked van arrived the next morning, and 3 quiet, professional men spent the day turning my home into a fortress. They installed cameras so small you'd never notice them, motion sensors, and a panic button system that connected directly to the Scottsdale PD. I felt safer physically, but I knew technology alone wouldn't win this war. Kevin and Brittany, having failed with poison and finding their nursing home pitch met with my polite, non-committal deflection, moved to their next tactic. A campaign of psychological warfare. It started subtly, a slow drip of poison into the ears of our friends and neighbors. The first sign was a phone call from my neighbor of 20 years, Mrs. Gable. "Eleanor, dear," she began, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern that set my teeth on edge. "I was just speaking with that lovely Brittany of yours on the phone. She's so terribly worried about you." I gripped the receiver tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Is she now? And what exactly is she so worried about?" "Oh, you know," Mrs. Gable said with a sigh. "She said you've been a bit forgetful since the big sale. Misplacing your keys, forgetting appointments. She even said you seemed a little confused at the party the other night. The poor dear is just beside herself with worry for you." My blood ran cold. It was a lie, a complete fabrication from start to finish. They were planting seeds. They were building a narrative, painting me as a dotty old woman who was losing her grip on reality. They were trying to poison my reputation, to discredit me before I could ever make an accusation against them. A few days later, a longtime family friend, a man who had known Kevin since he was a boy, called with a similar story. This one had been fed to him by Kevin himself. "He said you were talking about making some rash financial decisions, Eleanor. He's just worried someone might take advantage of you in your delicate state." Delicate state? I had just successfully negotiated and closed a $25 million deal. I was anything but delicate. They weren't just trying to take my money anymore. They were trying to erase me, to steal my credibility, my reputation, my very identity. It was a vicious, insidious attack on my mind. They were trying to paint me as a crazy old woman, a confused senior who couldn't be trusted. What would you have done in my shoes? If your own child was going behind your back, telling the world you were losing your mind just to get their hands on your money? I genuinely want to know what you would do. Let me know in the comments below. They made one fatal mistake, though, one critical miscalculation in their cruel campaign. They underestimated me. Just when I was feeling the most isolated, trapped in my beautiful home that was starting to feel like a gilded cage, while my own son slandered me to our friends, an unexpected visitor arrived at my door. It was Carol Peterson, Brittany's mother. I saw her on my new security monitor, standing on my doorstep looking frail and pale, but there was a fire in her eyes I had never seen before. I buzzed her in, my heart pounding with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. I led her into the living room, and she sat stiffly on the edge of my plush sofa, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. "Eleanor," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "We need to talk. It's about Brittany." She told me that Brittany and Kevin had been spinning a story for her too. They'd been visiting her daily in the hospital, paragons of concern, explaining that she'd had a severe, unexpected reaction to one of her old heart medications. "They said I must have gotten the dosage wrong," Carol explained, her gaze unwavering. "But that's the thing, Eleanor," she said, her hands trembling as she opened her purse. "I haven't been on any heart medication in 5 years. The doctors took me off it completely." I knew they were lying. My heart began to beat faster. She knew it was a lie. She knew something was deeply wrong. "Brittany has been obsessed with your money for months, for years even," Carol continued, tears welling in her tired eyes. "She would go on and on about how it wasn't fair you had so much. How one day it would all be theirs. I thought it was just ugly talk. The ramblings of a greedy, entitled young woman. I never ever thought she would." Her voice broke and a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. Then she did something that changed the entire game. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wadded-up tissue. She carefully unfolded it. Resting in the center was the small dark glass vial. It was empty. "I found this," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and resolve. "It fell out of the pocket of Brittany's coat at the hospital. The nurse was gathering her things for me and it rolled onto the floor under the bed. Picked it up. I knew it wasn't mine." She pushed it across the coffee table toward me. It was the vial. The murder weapon. Carol, a woman I had always dismissed as weak and flighty, had just handed me the key to bringing her own daughter down. Holding that vial in my hand, I felt a cold certainty wash over me. I now had the weapon. All I needed was to set the perfect trap to catch the murderers. With the physical evidence of the vial safely stored in a Ziploc bag in my safe, I made my next call. Maria Flores was a private investigator, a name Robert Sterling had given me with the highest recommendation. She was a legend in Phoenix, a woman known for her discretion and her almost supernatural ability to uncover truths people would kill to keep hidden. "I need to know everything about my son, Kevin Vance, and his wife, Brittany Vance," I told her over the encrypted phone line. "Everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, secret loans, business ledgers. Dig deep. I want to know where every penny comes from and where every penny goes." There was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "This is family, Eleanor. I have to warn you. Are you sure you want to open this door? Sometimes you can't close it again." "I'm sure," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "They opened this door, not me." 72 hours later, a slim manila envelope was delivered to my door by a discreet courier. I took it to my study, poured myself a glass of iced tea that I never touched, and began to read Maria's report. It was worse than I could have possibly imagined. It wasn't just that they were in debt. They were drowning in it, suffocating under an avalanche of their own greed. Over $200,000 in credit card debt was spread across more than a dozen cards. They were using one card to pay the minimum on another in a classic desperate shell game. There were 2 mortgages on their ridiculously oversized house in a gated community, plus a home equity line of credit that was completely maxed out. Kevin's architecture firm, which he presented to the world as a thriving, prestigious business, had been operating at a net loss for 3 solid years. They were living a complete and utter lie, funding their lavish lifestyle with my gifts, and an ever-growing mountain of debt that was about to collapse on top of them. But that wasn't the bombshell. There were 2. The first was a life insurance policy. 6 months ago, Brittany had taken out a $500,000 policy on my life, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. She had claimed an insurable interest as my primary caregiver. My caregiver. The woman who tried to poison me. The second bombshell was a name that made my blood run cold. Dr. Alan Reed, a geriatric psychiatrist in Phoenix. Maria's report showed a series of small, regular payments from Kevin's failing business account to Dr. Reed, starting 4 months ago. The memo line on each check was the same. Consultation. They had a plan for every contingency. Poison if I was compliant, and a hired gun psychiatrist to lock me away and call me crazy if I fought back. It was time to show them what crazy really looked like. Armed with the PI report, the vial, and a righteous fury that burned hotter than the Arizona sun, I knew my next move. I couldn't confront them directly with what I'd found. They would just lie, deny, and lawyer up, burying me in legal motions until I was too exhausted or too broke to fight back. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to lure them into a trap they wouldn't see coming. A trap constructed from their own greed. I had to let them think they were winning. I waited a day, letting my anger cool into a solid, sharp resolve. Then, I picked up the phone and dialed Kevin's number. I took a deep breath, pictured myself as the most vulnerable, fragile version of myself, and let a little tremor enter my voice. "Kevin," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's Mom. Mom, are you okay? I've been so worried. You haven't been answering my calls." The concern in his voice was as fake as a $3 bill, but I played along. I've just been doing a lot of thinking. I sighed, letting the silence hang in the air. About what you said. About Willow Creek Estates. About me being all alone in this big house. Maybe you're right. I'm just so tired of it all, Kevin. I don't think I can do this on my own anymore. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the silent, jubilant celebration on the other end of the line. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful," he said, the relief in his voice so thick it was almost comical. "I'm so glad you see that we're just trying to help. I think you'll really love it there. It's for the best, you'll see. Could you and Brittany come over tomorrow?" I asked, playing the part of the confused, aging mother to perfection. "To help me with all the paperwork? It's just so confusing for me, all these forms." "Of course, Mom. Anything you need. We'll be there at 10 in the morning." I hung up the phone, my hand steady as a rock. I felt no guilt, no remorse for the deception. They had declared war on me, and I was simply choosing the battlefield. The next morning, I carefully laid out the glossy brochures for Willow Creek Estates on my polished dining room table. I even found a set of old reading glasses I never used, and put them on to complete the image of a woman reluctantly surrendering her independence. They thought they were leading a lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea they were walking straight into the lion's den. And I was very, very hungry. They arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, just as they promised. They were dressed in their power suits, Brittany in a crisp cream-colored blazer and Kevin in a dark navy suit, carrying a handsome leather briefcase. They looked like a pair of vultures circling a fresh kill, barely able to contain their excitement. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you're making the right decision for your future," Brittany said, leaning in to kiss the air next to my cheek, her expensive perfume filling my senses. They spread the documents across my dining room table, a sea of fine print and signature lines that represented a comprehensive plan for my complete and total surrender. There was the thick admission contract for Willow Creek, full of clauses and conditions. There were the exhaustive financial disclosure forms that required me to list every single asset I owned, down to the last penny. And right on top, the crown jewel of their entire insidious scheme, the durable power of attorney. Kevin slid it in front of me with a magnanimous flourish. "This is just standard procedure, Mom," he said smoothly, his voice a reassuring purr. "It just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs if, you're not able to." I picked it up, letting my hand shake slightly for effect as I scanned the dense text. It was anything but standard. It was a sweeping, irrevocable document that would grant him immediate and absolute control of everything. My bank accounts, my investment portfolios, my home, my life. I feigned confusion, my brow furrowed behind my prop-reading glasses. I pointed to a clause here, a paragraph there. "This seems very broad, Kevin. Are you sure I need to give you this much authority right away?" Brittany jumped in, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "It's just a precaution, Eleanor. The facility requires it. And honestly, at your age, it's good to have someone younger and sharper handling all these complicated financial things." At your age. That condescending, dismissive phrase again. It was the fuel I needed. With a trembling hand. A nice touch, I thought. I took the pen they offered and I signed. I signed every document they put in front of me. Their smiles were blinding, triumphant. They thought they had me. They thought they had one. Just one more thing, I said, my voice quiet as I reached for my phone, my heart beginning to hammer in my chest. My lawyer Robert is on his way with the final transfer approval. He should be here any second. The silence that followed my announcement was thick with their barely contained glee. They were practically vibrating with it. They were picturing it all already. The effortless bank transfers, the shopping sprees at Neiman Marcus, the end of all their financial worries, all signed, sealed, and delivered by the very woman they tried to kill. They sat back in my dining room chairs, smug and satisfied, the architects of a flawless victory, just waiting for my lawyer to arrive and deliver the keys to their new kingdom. As if on cue, the doorbell chimed, a pleasant, melodic sound that signaled the beginning of the end. That must be him now, I said, a small genuine smile finally playing on my lips. Kevin stood up, straightening his already perfect tie, ready to greet the man who would finalize his triumph. He opened the heavy front door with a flourish. But it wasn't my silver-haired, impeccably dressed lawyer, Robert Sterling, standing on my porch. It was two people he didn't recognize. A man and a woman dressed in sharp, conservative suits that screamed law enforcement. They had badges clipped to their belts and expressions that were all business. They were detectives from the Scottsdale Police Department. Kevin froze in the doorway, his confident smile faltering. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice suddenly losing its assured tone. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" the female detective asked, her sharp eyes scanning the room over Kevin's shoulder and landing on the pile of legal documents on my table. "We're from the Scottsdale PD. We need to speak with you." Kevin tried to block the doorway. "My mother is in the middle of a private financial meeting. It's not a good time." But the detective was already stepping inside, her partner following close behind. "This can't wait. We're here to discuss a suspected poisoning that occurred at this residence last week." The color drained from Kevin's face as if a plug had been pulled. Brittany shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor in the deafening silence. "Poisoning," she stammered, her hand flying to her throat in a theatrical gesture. "That was my mother, she had an allergic reaction to her medication. The doctors said so." Detective Miller gave a thin, humorless smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's not what the hospital's official toxicology report says, Mrs. Vance," she said, pulling out a small notebook. "It says your mother ingested a concentrated, nearly lethal dose of oleander extract. And we found your fingerprints, Brittany, all over the empty vial that Mrs. Carol Peterson was kind enough to provide as evidence." Brittany's face was a mask of pure terror. "I didn't do anything. Why would I poison my own mother?" The detective just smirked. "Oh, we don't think she was your target." The room felt like it had been sucked of all air, a vacuum where only the sound of my own steady heartbeat remained. Brittany stared at Detective Miller, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock, no sound coming out. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and she was speechless. Kevin looked back and forth between his wife's horrified face and the detective's grim expressions, his own composure shattering like a cheap mirror. The second detective, a quiet, imposing man who hadn't said a word yet, stepped forward and placed a slim file on the dining room table. He placed it right on top of their precious power of attorney documents, covering their signature of greed with the evidence of their crime. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his thumb. "This," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room, "is a copy of a $500,000 life insurance policy taken out on Eleanor Vance 6 months ago. The sole beneficiary is listed right here. Brittany Vance." He tapped a thick finger on her name, the sound like a gavel falling. "That establishes a clear and significant financial motive for attempted murder." "This is insane. A setup," Brittany finally shrieked, finding her voice. "Eleanor, tell them. This is a terrible misunderstanding." I looked at my daughter-in-law, this venomous woman who had smiled at me while planning my death, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty calm. "There's no misunderstanding, Brittany," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through her hysteria. "I saw you put the poison in my glass." Then I turned my gaze to my son, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Kevin, show me your phone." He flinched as if I'd struck him with a physical blow. "What? Why?" he stammered. "Your phone, Kevin." Show me your text messages with your wife from the night of the party. He refused, shaking his head, but it didn't matter. Detective Miller already had a warrant. She took his phone from his trembling hand, and in a matter of minutes, had the incriminating messages displayed on a small tablet for all to see. She read them aloud in a flat, monotone voice that made the words even more chilling. Kevin to Brittany. Is the package for Mom ready for tonight? Brittany to Kevin. All set. Don't worry. After tonight, she'll need our help. It was all laid bare. Their coded conversation, their cruel intentions. I just want to pause here and say thank you for sticking with me on this journey. It's been a lot, I know, and I appreciate you being here. If you're still with me, please comment with the number 1 so I know you're right here with me. Thank you. Now back to it. Kevin looked at me, his face finally crumbling into genuine despair. Mom, I swear I didn't know she was going to use poison. I thought she was just going to scare you. I stared back at my son, my heart breaking for the man he'd failed to become. Scare me? Or traumatize me into giving you everything I've ever worked for? Kevin's silence was his confession. It hung in the air, thick and damning. He knew. He might not have known the specific ingredient was oleander, but he knew his wife was planning to harm me that night. He had signed off on a plan to frighten me, an elderly woman, his own mother, so badly that I would run into their arms and sign away my life, my independence and my fortune. He was a co-conspirator, a willing participant in my destruction. Detective Miller saw the confession in his eyes as clearly as I did. She nodded to her partner. Brittany Vance, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. As the detective cuffed her hands behind her back, the cold, hard reality of the situation finally crashed down on Brittany. The designer clothes, the oversized house, the life of effortless leisure. It was all evaporating before her very eyes. Her face, once a mask of calculated sweetness, twisted into a snarl of pure, undiluted hatred. She lunged toward me, a guttural scream tearing from her throat, held back only by the firm grip of the officer on her arm. You old witch, she screamed, her voice raw with fury. You think you're so clever, don't you? You've ruined everything. Everything. I looked at her, at the empty, pathetic rage in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I let my own mask of calm drop. No, Brittany, I said, my voice low and dangerous, each word a carefully placed stone. You did. You ruined everything the moment you saw me as an obstacle instead of a mother. I just made sure you didn't take me down with you. After she was led away, a sobbing, shrieking mess still screaming threats and curses, I turned my attention back to my son. He was still slumped in his chair, a broken statue, staring at the pile of signed documents on the table as if they were the ashes of his life. I walked over and picked up the durable power of attorney, the document he believed was his ticket to my $25 million fortune. You were so eager to have me sign this, Kevin, I said softly. He looked up, a flicker of something desperate and wild in his eyes. Mom, please, we can fix this. I handed him the document. You should know what you signed. He looked at me confused. This gives you full and complete power of attorney, I explained calmly, over a specific newly created bank account in my name. I had Robert set it up yesterday morning. His brow furrowed, a sliver of hope warring with his overwhelming fear. A bank account? I smiled a sad, weary smile. Yes, a bank account that contains exactly $1. His face went from despair to utter disbelief. It was as if I'd spoken to him in a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. $1, he whispered, the words barely audible. What? That's not possible. But, the money from the sale, my inheritance, the will. He was grasping at straws, his mind refusing to accept the totality of his defeat. I shook my head slowly, the last vestiges of my maternal pity dissolving into a cold, hard clarity. Oh, the real money. The $25 million? It's locked away in a series of irrevocable trusts that Robert and I structured years ago. Not even God himself could touch that money without my explicit, notarized permission. As for your inheritance, Kevin, there is none. Not anymore. I watched as the final nail was driven into the coffin of his greed. The new will I signed last week, after your little party, leaves the bulk of my estate to cancer research and several charities I've supported for years. You are allocated a small trust, just enough to prevent you from starving on the street, but not nearly enough to fund the lifestyle you've become accustomed to. And even that small amount has a very strict morality clause. If you're convicted as a conspirator in your wife's little murder plot, which you will be, you get nothing. Not a single red cent. The last bit of color drained from his face. He stared at me, the full, crushing weight of his ruin finally crashing down upon him. He had gambled everything on my death, on my weakness, on my love for him, and he had lost spectacularly. You destroyed my life, he whispered. The words filled with a pathetic, self-pitying venom. I felt a pang in my chest, a deep ancient ache for the little boy he used to be. The boy who believed in heroes and monsters. But that boy was long gone, replaced by this greedy, weak-willed stranger sitting before me. No, Kevin, I said, my voice hardening, devoid of all warmth. You destroyed your own life. You did it piece by piece, every time you took my money without gratitude. You did it when you saw your mother as a bank account instead of a person. You did it when you stood by and let your wife plot to harm me. You did it when you lied to our friends and tried to have me declared insane. I didn't destroy your life. I just saved my own. He left my house a broken man, without another word, the phony power of attorney papers fluttering from his numb hand onto the floor. And as I watched him go, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a deep, profound sadness for the boy I had raised, and the empty shell of a man he had chosen to become. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 months can feel like a lifetime or just the blink of an eye. In the deafening silence that followed the storm of arrests and accusations, a new kind of life, a quieter life, began to take shape. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. Faced with the vial with her fingerprints, the damning insurance policy, and her own mother's tearful testimony against her, Brittany took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. She was sentenced to 15 years in a state prison. Kevin, for his part in the conspiracy, received a sentence of 3 years. His high-priced lawyer, paid for by the last of their liquidated assets, managed to successfully argue that he was a weak man manipulated by a predatory wife, a narrative I found both pathetic and infuriatingly predictable. He was a grown man who had made his choices. The person I worried about most in all of this was my granddaughter, Lily. At 16, she was old enough to understand the full gravity of what her parents had done, and I feared the shame and horror of it all would crush her vibrant spirit. She called me the night after the sentencing, her voice thick with tears that broke my heart. "Grandma Eleanor," she sobbed. "I am so sorry. I had no idea what they were. I never would have." "I know, sweetheart," I told her, my own voice gentle. "I know you didn't. None of this is your fault. You are a victim in this just as much as I am. You hear me?" We made plans for her to leave her hometown and spend the entire summer with me in Scottsdale, away from the whispers and the pitying stares. An unexpected and beautiful friendship blossomed from the wreckage. Carol and I started meeting for coffee twice a week at a quiet little cafe downtown. We were 2 women from different worlds, a timid widow and a hardened businesswoman, bound together by the bizarre and painful experience of being betrayed by our own children. We talked for hours, not just about them, but about our lives, our hopes, our regrets. She was even talking about writing a book, a cautionary tale about elder abuse, using our story as the foundation. "You know," she said to me one sunny Tuesday morning, stirring her latte and looking more alive than I'd ever seen her, "I keep thinking about how close they came to getting away with it all." I smiled, a real genuine smile. "They never stood a chance, Carol. I've been dealing with sharks my whole life. The only difference this time was that they shared my blood. Life was becoming peaceful again." But then my lawyer Robert called with one final piece of news about Kevin and Brittany's house, the house I had helped them buy. And it gave me an idea. "The creditors are moving fast, Eleanor," Robert explained over the phone, his voice crisp and professional. "They're seizing all of Kevin and Brittany's assets to cover the mountain of debt they're in. That includes the house on Primrose Lane. The bank is foreclosing." He paused. "Now, since your initial down payment gift makes you a party of interest in the property, the bank is legally obligated to ask if you want to make an offer to buy it back before it goes to a public auction." I leaned back in my study chair, picturing that house. It was a beautiful, oversized McMansion in a gated community, with a 3-car garage and a pool with a waterfall feature. I remembered the day they closed on it, the sheer joy on Kevin's face, the way Brittany had immediately started talking about knocking down walls for a bigger master closet and installing a wine cellar. It was their dream house, a perfect, glittering monument to the life they felt they were owed, a life they were willing to kill for. It was a house built on a foundation of my generosity and their bottomless greed. For a fleeting moment I considered it. I could buy it for pennies on the dollar, flip it, and add the considerable profits to my already substantial fortune. It would be a smart business move. But it felt hollow. It felt like their brand of victory, not mine. It was a victory measured only in dollars and cents. "No, Robert," I said finally, my decision solidifying as I spoke the words. "I don't want the house for myself." "All right," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I'll let them know you're passing." "But," I continued, an idea taking shape in my mind, bright and clear and powerful, "I want you to do something for me. I want you to set up a new charitable foundation. A nonprofit. We can call it the Lily Fund, after my granddaughter." Robert was silent for a moment, processing. "What kind of foundation, Eleanor?" "I want you to make an offer on that house on behalf of the foundation," I instructed, my voice filled with a new energy. "Use my money. And if we get it, I want to turn it into a safe house. A beautiful, dignified, transitional home for seniors who are victims of financial or emotional abuse from their own families. A place where they can get free legal help, financial counseling, and a safe roof over their head while they get back on their feet and reclaim their lives." Turning their monument to greed into a sanctuary for victims felt like the ultimate victory. But the real victory came a few days later, in a text message from my granddaughter. I was sitting on my patio in the early evening, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in breathtaking shades of orange, pink, and purple. The air was warm and smelled of jasmine. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of deep, profound peace. That's when my phone buzzed with a message. It was a text from Lily. My heart gave a little jump. I slid on my reading glasses and read the words that would define the next chapter of my life. "Grandma, I have to tell you something. I got my early admission acceptance letter today. I got into Stanford Law." My breath caught in my throat, and my eyes filled with tears. I read the message again and then a third time. The message continued. "I know it's a long way off, but after everything that's happened with Mom and Dad, I want to be a lawyer like Mr. Sterling. I want to spend my life fighting for people like you. People who others try to take advantage of. I'm going to be a force for good, Grandma. Promise. I can't wait to tell you all about it this summer." I smiled through my tears, a real bone-deep smile of pride and joy. I typed back, my fingers flying across the screen. "Congratulations, sweetheart. Your grandfather would be so proud. I am so incredibly proud of you." And in that moment, sitting there as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, I realized what my true legacy was. It wasn't the $25 million sitting in trust funds. It wasn't the real estate empire I had built from scratch. It was this. It was the chance to ensure that the next generation of my family would choose a better path. A path of integrity and compassion. Lily would grow up knowing that strength wasn't about how much you could take, but how much you could give. That family meant support and love, not exploitation and greed. I'd started this story talking about a failed poisoning at my retirement party, but really it was about something much more important. It's about the difference between being old and being powerless. I might be 70, but I am far from powerless. My mind is sharp, my will is iron, and my resources are now dedicated to protecting myself and others like me. And anyone who tries to test that theory will learn, as my son and daughter-in-law did, that underestimating a sharp old woman is a very, very expensive mistake. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, and ensuring those who wronged you can never harm anyone again. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt necessary. If you or someone you know has ever experienced anything like this, betrayal from those who are supposed to love you most, please share your story in the comments. Your voice matters and you are not alone. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. You never know whose life you might change by sharing your own.